Really quickly about client success, you know us for our community and for our thought leadership and just participating with all of you wonderful folks. Just want to remind you of who you are. While we do produce all of that content, we also are a customer success platform. We help customers manage from new to renew, keeping your customer base healthy, having all the visibility you need by using automations, AI, custom reporting. All of the things that you need to better track your customer health can be found within the client success platform. And we are excited to speak with you. If you have any needs there, of course, do reach out to us and we'd love to hear from you. Let me introduce Bob London. I'll let him introduce a little bit more about himself. But today we're going to be talking about strategic conversations, how to make them better, how to do them the right way, perhaps why they aren't working, why those QBRs aren't quite living up to snuff. So Bob's going to touch on all of those today. We're really lucky to have him. And with that, Bob, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and I'll allow you to share your screen.
Sounds good. You should be able to see it.
We got it.
Welcome, folks. It's great to see some familiar names and folks that I've interacted with in the past. And I want to thank Dave for his work in hosting this, but also, I can't think of a company that has done more to sort of elevate from its very unique position to elevate the community. It's just stunning, actually. And if you haven't been, I'll put in a plug. If you haven't checked out Client Success's content, but more particularly, if you haven't been to CS 100, I would definitely make it a priority to go. I know that it costs actual money, and I know budgets are what they are, but it's amazing that one insight, one data point, one lesson learned, one use case, something that comes from an event, one relationship can have such stunning value. So I want to thank Client Success for everything they're doing to elevate the community. And we've kind of talked about the title of this a few times. I'm not going to dwell on it, but excuse me, this concept of QBR fatigue, I guess I want to come at it from the perspective of what are our customers saying? What do they think? And so that's where we're going to start off. And this is a movie quote. I'm not sure if it's a classic piece of Hollywood dialogue, but the quote is, "That's enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me?" And it is this is the quote to me that summarizes how customers perceive so many vendor interactions that they have, that we want to talk about our product, yet the customer or prospect is not defined by what they buy from us. They're defined by the problems that they're trying to solve. And another way to say it is that the customers aren't obsessed with our solution. They're obsessed with their own priorities and challenges and how to address those. So that's kind of the tone setter for today. And why am I even interested in this stuff? Well, it turns out that after a lengthy corporate career and a career as a marketing strategy consultant doing brand strategy and messaging work, I found out that companies didn't really understand their customers that well, which hindered my ability to do my engagements. So I started doing customer listening tours for my clients. And that was, I guess it's been about 9 years and 2,700 discovery conversations ago. So I would go out into the market virtually and meet with my clients' customers. And I learned some things that I'm going to share with you in a few minutes. But basically, the gist of it is, as relates to this whole QBR fatigue, is customers really open up when you ask about them. I'm going to say it again. Customers really open up when you ask about them. In the world of behavioral science, or just even logic, this is not new news, because think about families, relationships, kids, human interaction. People engage more when they feel like you really want to hear what they have to say. That's when they really open up, instead of this sort of push, slide after slide. We can't do that in every meeting. And I always joke around that we have, as a group of vendors, and I include myself in this always, we have really effectively trained our customers to expect that every interaction is going to be about us. And that's what we're up against, is changing that mindset. And customers aren't going to change their mindset, that perception, until we change our behavior. So that's what we're going to talk about. in case you need a little bit of convincing about why this is important, think about it this way. What you say to your customer is only as relevant and effective and impactful and powerful as what you already learned from them. You can't just out of the gate start talking unless you have lined up and understood the value that you can deliver versus what their challenge or priority is in a given situation. There are some great statistics to support why this is so important. The Rain Group, which is a fantastic sales consultancy, says they did a survey among buyers, and they said buyers say that discovery and listening are two of their top purchase influences. Discovery is number one, influence, listening is number three among vendors out of 15. Yet buyers also say vendors basically stink at both of those attributes, listening and discovery. So there's a huge gap there, which presents an opportunity for people like us. And I think when I say us, everyone in this call must be curious about how to do their job better and a different way of doing things. And that makes me feel happy that you're here. The next one is from Gong, a company many of you might know as the analytics and insights platform for conversation insights, conversation intelligence. The top performing reps, B2B, talk less than half the time in their customer conversations versus the bottom performing reps who talk nearly 3/4 of the time. And I think we could probably, all of us have been through on the receiving end of vendor conversations where we probably can nod our heads and say, yep, I get it. That makes sense. I would rather deal with people who leave me a little bit of time in the conversation to breathe and just to address questions that they have instead of just talking at me the whole time. And the last one is really interesting. Forrester research says 82% of executives say they'd rather have a conversation than sit through a presentation. And I would welcome you to use the chat if you'd like to chime in. Why do you think that's the case? So don't use the Q&A, but the chat. Why would executives rather have a conversation than sit through a presentation? And while you're thinking about that and perhaps typing if you want, I'll start to explain what I've learned. And that is that when an executive is sitting through a presentation, yeah, Tanya says PowerPoint fatigue. That's exactly right. But what is it about PowerPoint and slides that's so difficult for executives on the receiving end? And the answer is that executives are focused and busy, and therefore they have certain things on their mind that they think are important. If you start the meeting with slide after slide about your product, you are not leaving room to align your content with what's important to them. All you have to do is ask them, and they'll tell you. Mark says, I sit through inane PowerPoint. Mark, I've seen this on LinkedIn before. I sit through inane PowerPoint all day long with people that don't understand the business. When you talk to me, you prove you understand my business. I'm not going to read all these, but this is excellent. Once I had an exec tell me after a presentation, okay, you showed me your happy path. Now let's discuss my path. So I'm going to steal that for sure. Yeah, slides are a form of control. They are effectively, slides and agendas are sort of guardrails that we put in place as vendors. And we're trying to control and choreograph the conversation in a way that suits the outcomes we want, which all, of course, assumes that what we want and what the customer has to say and what their problem is exactly the same. And that's just simply not the case. So I want to share with you a little bit. So I'm going to give you some tools and techniques very specifically, but first I want to do a little teaching, a little bit of sort of background that'll help you understand this. So in my journey of not only doing a lot of discovery calls, but also teaching many, many customer-facing teams how to do discovery, I've uncovered what I would call these soul-crushing engagement myths. So why is engagement the thing, right? Because it sounds kind of soft and squishy. It's hard to measure. But the only way you're going to learn anything new about your customer and insight is if they're engaging. If they're not showing up and opening up, game over. It's not going to happen. Once they open up, you're able to learn and get insights that are going to help you help them. And ultimately from that come revenue opportunities. So this is the reason we're talking about all this today. If this is the outcome we are all seeking, everything else I tell you is a means to get to these outcomes. So here are the myths that I've learned. Number one, no one is saying, hey, when I grow up, I want to be a software user. Like, I really want to learn how to use software product. That's not a job. That's not a job description. It's not an aspiration. No one is that focused on using software, but that's kind of how we treat them. But so the reality is we have to recognize that customers are experts in their job and their business, not our product. We don't want them, we should never expect them to become super experts. That's our job, is to help them leverage the product to solve what their problems and priorities are. The next one is you always have to have a tightly scripted agenda. And that's another myth, completely wrong, because there should be parts of the meeting that are, I call it agendaless, where there isn't, it's open. You want to set the stage for them to open up. And so it turns out, as I alluded to before, customers are much more candid when there are fewer guardrails in the conversation. Slides happen to be a guardrail. Strict agendas happen to be a guardrail. And so let's remove some of the constructs that we put in place in order to facilitate candor and openness, which again forms insight engagements that lead to insights and revenue. Next, yeah, if it's important, my customer will tell me. Wrong. They are much more transparent but we have to ask, we have to put some effort into the questions. And before we conclude today, in a few minutes, I'm going to give you, right out of my radically authentic discovery training, which I'll explain, I'm going to give you 3 disruptive questions that you can start using immediately today if you have a customer meeting. And the questions are proven to speak to a different part of the customer's brain and get them to open up, because the questions are about them, not us. So don't assume that if it's important, they'll mention it to you. Next, we always need a bunch of slides and statistics. So I'm not going to tell you that you should never have slides. That's not my point. My point is that don't misuse the slides as a way to set the stage for a meeting and put guardrails on the meeting. Slides, in my experience, are the #1 inhibitor of human intimacy in a business setting. I'm going to say that again. Slides are the #1 inhibitor of human authentic intimacy and interaction. If there's a slide deck in the meeting, it almost becomes like a third person or entity in the meeting. Hi, I'm Bob. I'm your customer success manager. You're the customer, and this is Doc, the document. And you're going to look at Doc and read Doc. Doc might have a few things to say, but I want you to also listen to me, and back and forth. And it just doesn't really work. So let's be mindful of overusing slides and certainly using them as a crutch. So one of the things I talk about is the ability to have more strategic customer conversations in place of some of the QBR time that we've scheduled, right? So we're shifting from our point of view, which is adoption stats, et cetera, product feature roadmap, to what is their point of view. So I say strategic conversations, and some people say, well, they won't talk about, my customers aren't going to talk about their business priorities or strategy. Why would they talk about that? Well, they do. I'm here to tell you that if you ask about them, they will talk your ear off. They will go on and on. Why? Because it goes back to the first myth. They're experts in that. This is their comfort zone. And they recognize ultimately that if they'll help you understand their business a little bit better, what they're trying to achieve, the outcomes, the value, how they define value and success, if they can get you to understand that, that's better for them. It helps them in the long run. And this is why. Yes, please. Sorry.
Good question coming in kind of around this and on a point you just touched. So from Nicole, what are some ideas, word tracks to get a meeting scheduled with non-responsive customers who are new to a book of business? Historically, they have not, met with them, likely due to not seeing value in the product yet or in the meetings. And thinking about phone outreach, since email isn't generating engagement, what do you see to get that non-responsive, non-engaging customer on the line?
Right. It's a really good question. So after I share the disruptive questions, I'm going to share an email template. And that email template is what I have used thousands of times for my clients, B2B companies, to send to their customers to get them to engage with me. In other words, I'm doing a listening tour. My client sends this email. It points to my scheduling tool, and the client sets up a meeting. You'll see when Nicole and others, you'll see when I show that, and if you don't mind, I'm going to wait to show it, that the way the email is worded does not talk about value. It does not talk about the typical vendor things. And it basically says, we want to understand your world, so that, because the better we understand your world, we'll have a more successful path to delivering value to you. So I'll shorten it that way and tease it a little bit, because I do address that very specifically in a few minutes. And thank you, David, for the comment, for the compliment. Duly noted. The last myth is you have to keep, you're leading the meeting, you got to keep talking. And the reality is that's an artificial construct that comes from, I think, years, decades of centuries even of training that emphasizes how to present, how to talk, how to pitch, how to keep talking, how to address obstacles, objections, how to overcome objections. The reality is that the less you talk, and I gave you a statistic on that before, the less you talk, the more you'll learn. Like you've never learned anything while your lips are moving. You have to shut up sometimes. And the way to do that, and by the way, that's more disarming and engaging to the customer, is when you don't jump in and keep talking every time they stop talking. This, my friends, is where there's a tool that's perfect to help you. It's right on your keyboard or your screen. It's called the mute button. If you ask a good question and then hit the mute button, it will serve as sort of a self-editing tool, if you will, so that when you do think of something to say, first of all, you might start to talk and you realize you're on mute, and then you have a chance to say, the customer was kind of on a roll there. Maybe this wasn't the right time to jump in. Let me save that comment for later and see. Because the risk is, if you jump in too soon and break the silence, then, if there's a pause, you're disrupting the customer's flow. And one of the most important things is for them to see that this is not a typical vendor meeting. They're sick of the typical vendor meeting where the vendor is talking all the time. One of the most beautiful things that you'll see is when the customer realizes, wow, I gave them some information and they didn't immediately pitch to their point of view. They just kind of stayed with me and they wanted to learn more. When they realize that the meeting is about them primarily, that the look on their face or the things that they start to say are just amazing. So remember to use the mute button. I do it a bunch of times too. Yes, Chris, there's a recording that will be shared afterwards. So I'm keeping an eye on the chat a little bit. So those are the myths. And that leads us to our big problem of the day. We have these things, I do a different talk called customer love languages, but for the purposes of brevity here, vendors are in love with QBRs. We love our QBRs. We want to schedule them. We want to start them. We want to have lots of data in them and stuff. So we kind of come at it to the customer by saying, like, hey, look, it's almost like, hey, you bought this product. We're going to throw in absolutely free 4 really substantive meetings a year to make sure you're getting the right value and outcomes. Absolutely free, these meetings. And of course, they're called QBRs. But the reality is, we just want to get in front of the customer to make sure you're not going to churn. And I want to link this back to Nicole's question about the talk track or the email template that I'm going to share, because one of the reasons they don't show up is because they think it's going to be all about us. One of the reasons they don't engage is because they think it's going to be all about us. Unfortunately, if QBR was a brand, that brand would be tinged with customers rolling their eyes, right? Because the way customers hear it is, hey, I got 15 vendors in my tech stack. By the way, I talked to a cybersecurity chief cybersecurity information officer who said he has 85 technologies in his tech stack. So you can imagine trying them from their point of view, our one QBR a quarter is not the center of their universe. They've got too much on their plate. Plus, they say to themselves, you know, seriously, like the real life situation, vendor, is these meetings just seem like they're all about you anyway. So what's in it for me, right? And that's where this QBR fatigue comes from.
And Bob, I just did a quick poll to see
Yeah, I
if
see that.
that's what folks are indeed do. The majority, over 85% of folks are doing QBRs. Maybe you're getting there, but would be interested to see how you're repositioning or rebranding QBRs. I'm sure that's what folks are thinking is QBRs elicit the wrong response. And for those who are running them, maybe is there a reframing or a rebranding?
You know, it's a really interesting point. So for a while last year, I talked about something called the UBR, the letter U, which simply stands for you, the customer. But that's not an external branding that you would use to say, hey, customer, we'd like to have a UBR. I think the email that I share in a little while, that template will explain how it's positioned, but there's not a new name for it. You know, Christy Falteruso from ClientSuccess, who we all know and love, I think she's on to it. I mean, I think she's proven that her COR, customer objectives review, if you're going to talk about content, but that is trying to demonstrate where you are in the relationship and the value you're bringing to the customer, that's the content. This is different. This is just, hey, we want to take a step back and learn a little bit about your business kind of thing. So that's the positioning. It doesn't really have a new brand associated with it. Although I will say that the UBR concept, I guess, because it was simple and kind of almost, it started as a joke on a LinkedIn post, did seem to capture people's imagination, mostly because I guess even vendors have QBR fatigue, right? So how do we stop talking at customers and start understanding them? So I have this methodology created over many years in customer discovery conversations called radically authentic discovery. This is really the approach that I would suggest you consider, right, for yourself in terms of getting customers to engage. And I guess to further answer the question that Dave just posed, what I would say is this is a framework and a tool set, right, to help you understand your customers better. So how would you use it? My suggestion is to replace one QBR per year with one of these discovery meetings. Why? Because if you want to have successful QBRs later in the year, you better get on the same page with your customer in terms of how they define value and success. And that's what this new meeting is for, is to just simply understand them. The other way to do it is to carve out some time at the beginning of a QBR to say, hey, and again, I'll share the email template of how to do it. Hey, we want to take a step back and just understand where you got, how's business, where are things headed, how are you feeling about things, and some other specific questions. That way, and this is something sales has been doing forever, ask the questions at the beginning so you can tune the rest of the conversation to what their top priorities are. So radically authentic discovery is this discovery and listening framework and very specific tool set.
Hey, Bob, can I?
Yeah.
Real quick, practically, can I ask a question?
Please.
Sales teams have been doing discovery, and great sellers do good, really great discovery. Do you ever recommend that us on the post-sale world, watch a few really great discovery calls from our sales reps to get some ideas?
Well, here's what I would say. The best lesson that can be learned from sales, I don't know if it's specifically the questions. I think that it is the idea that asking really good questions is how customers react to that and how positive their experience is and how worthwhile it is in terms of getting the customer to open up. So yes, I think there are great examples out there that you can kind of listen to and learn from. But I think the reason that's such a good question, though, sales does discovery with the intent to do something. And the intent is to continue the sale down the path, continue the buyer, get to the next step of the buyer journey. Yes, there's qualification, and yes, there are other aspects to it. Post sales, it's different. You're already in the relationship. You're already kind of in the circle of trust to some degree. And so the questions are more about the customer's world post-sale. And by the way, sometimes the value proposition that they bought into in the sales process has evolved. They're expecting something different because their business has changed, or in using your product, the value they're getting is different from what they thought they were going to get in the beginning. Sometimes it's better. So post-sales discovery, in my experience, is very, very different. Again, it's more open-ended, whereas with sales, they're really trying to choreograph the conversation so that they ask questions to try to get certain answers, as opposed to post-sales where you're trying to get the truth. Not that sales isn't trying to get the truth. I know this is being recorded, so I just want to be clear about that. But yeah, customer success post-sales can afford to be more open-ended to find out, well, what's changed since we agreed to start working together. I hope that addresses the point. So inside of the radically authentic discovery methodology are disruptive questions. It's a disruptive question that, and I'll break these down in a few minutes, are questions that wake up a different part of the customer's brain. It speaks to their world, not ours, right? And then once that's to get them to open up. Once they open up, you have deep listening techniques to make sure you capture the essence of what they're saying and why they think it's important. Again, the goal is to have, and I hear this all the time from CS leaders reaching out and saying, we really want our team to be more proactive, to have more strategic, open-ended conversations about the customer. Because as you see the trend of scaled CS, digital, self-service, what you realize is that one of the big reasons for that, of course, profitability and scale. But the outcome of that is that the customer success folks are then positioned, because they have less sort of below the line tactical work to do, hopefully, they're able to be more consultative, be trusted advisors, to be more in a contributory mode with respect to delivering value to the customer. So when your company gets to the point where there is more scale and digital CS initiatives happening, be ready to be skilled to have more strategic open-ended conversations using this approach. And then the goal here is not to find out if they're staying or leaving. Of course, that's part of it. But the most important thing is to understand the outcome that's most meaningful to them, the person you're speaking with, but also their company. In other words, we have to, yes, we're selling to and servicing and supporting human beings, but those human beings have a job in the context of their company. And if your contact leaves, it happens all the time, they leave, they move on, there might be a layoff, they get promoted. You have to create a stickiness with the value of what you're offering to their company's priorities, not just because the person you're speaking with and who made the decision or is using the product just because they like it doesn't always carry the day. And then again, what it's all about, more customer engagement, insights, and revenue opportunities. You can't get those things unless you get customers to lower their guard and trust you that you have their best interests at heart. So there are 4 principles of radically authentic discovery. I'm going to share 2. The first one is open your aperture. Aperture is a word that describes the size of an opening of a camera lens. To open your aperture is to see more light, let in more light. So I want you to stop seeing these people as the customer. I want you to stop seeing them as the customer. I know that might sound crazy. They're not customers or users. They actually are people who are doing a job. They're trying to do a job, and to do that job, they need your product, your solution. And you have to understand that context. What is their job? Why is it important to them? What's going on? And what role in doing their job well does your product fill, right? And by the way, your product might constitute 10% of their success, of your customer's success, that person's success. But we're not done opening the aperture. We want to open it even wider to understand their company's why. When I alluded to that a few minutes ago, what are their company's goals, priorities, and challenges? And then what you can do is, the most magical thing is when you can make a case or get them to articulate that there are connections between, hey, our company is trying to accomplish this, right? Here's the most important thing for our company almost at the board level. My job is to contribute X to what the company is trying to accomplish. Because the only reason they have a job and are getting paid is to achieve something for their company, right? And then how does your solution help them do that job better? And the best scenario in the world is when you can create a link. The best companies in the world with the stickiest products create a very strong link between how their solution, what the value of their solution is, and what the company is trying to accomplish. I know this is not always what CS folks think about and talk about. I'm trying to, expand your mind a little bit from the world of adoption stats, features, benefits, to talk about things from the customer's perspective. And for them, also, a huge win is when your product is helping their company do something really, really important. Okay. So that's opening the aperture. Now we get to, this is kind of the heartbeat of the entire methodology, is the questions. Now I have a toolkit of 16 questions for different parts of the conversation. For the purposes of today, I'm going to share three. These are three of the best, three of the most powerful disruptive questions. But I'm showing them to you in this inverted, I don't know what it is, a trapezoid, because I want to demonstrate to you that you're supposed to start the conversation with a big picture question, like 30,000 foot. Next, you can ask a question that's more specific to their role, their department. And then you've kind of gotten enough trust and permission, if you will, to ask a question like, hey, what do you think of us? Okay, so I'm going to give you one specific question for each of these buckets, if you will. So here's the first one. Hey, if I was a fly on the wall, or if I could sneak into your next board meeting or your next executive leadership meeting, what do you think is the top priority or challenge I'd hear them discussing? So you're asking them, instead of just saying, what's important to your company, you're asking it in a much more interesting way. And I can almost hear the wheels turning in people's minds. Well, my contact's not in the board meeting. They're not an executive. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. I've asked this question thousands of times. The teams I work with have asked this question, hundreds or thousands of times. Everyone has a perspective on this because companies are doing a much better job of communicating top-down priorities. Why? Because employees are demanding it. They want to know the why behind what they're doing, what their job is. So this is a very effective way to do two things. This question. One is it's very disarming. If you ask this question at the beginning of a conversation, and I do it all the time at the very beginning, they will immediately think to themselves, and they might even say, well, that's a good question. That's not, like, they're thinking to themselves, this is not a normal meeting. And that's good. You're trying to disrupt their thought process that you're not a typical CSM, your company is not a typical vendor. So they become a little bit disarmed, which means they're more likely to give you candid answers throughout the entire conversation. But the second reason I asked this in the beginning is because it's that first dot. When we talk about connecting the dots, we're going to ask about what their top priority is. Let's say they say growth, right? Which is a little bit generic and not that helpful. You have a chance to say, okay, well, to achieve the growth you're trying to achieve, is there one big initiative that the company's really making a bet on, right? And then you can find out, depending on what your product is, yeah, I think we actually support that initiative. We are part of that strategy. And it makes you become, as I mentioned before, stickier. This is what great companies do with the stickiest products, is they create a connection with the most important priorities that companies have, not just the person they're trying to convince to be a user, right? The next question. So, and I'll describe it the way I ask it. So a lot of times, someone's job description is 2 pages, single spaced. But a lot of times also, it really boils down to one thing in your job description that the company is absolutely counting on you to get done this year. Is there one thing like that for you? Again, disarming. It's a different way for them to think about it. And it's fascinating to hear them think out loud because they've never thought about it this way. And one of the great leaders and experts in the world of listening is a guy named Oscar Trimboli. And he wrote a great book. And as a podcast, you can look it up. It's called Deep Listening. And he says that part of the listener's job is to help the speaker clarify their thoughts, so that your job is to help the customer clarify their priorities, and not necessarily influence, but to clarify them. And this is a way that gets people to think about, yeah, I guess that's a good point. Like, there's a bunch of stuff in my goals and job description that, truthfully, if they don't get done this year, probably, no harm, no foul. But there's one big thing that if it doesn't happen, I'm really going to be concerned, and my boss is going to be concerned. So that's a question about their job. And again, helps you perhaps connect the dots between what their company is trying to accomplish, what they have to do in their job. Now, hold on to your seats, because this is the one that gets typically a pretty big reaction. So let me ask you this. If you got a call from our competitor tomorrow, email, phone call, how would you react on a scale of 1 to 5? A 1 is you'd probably ignore it. A 5 is you'd probably get back to them pretty quickly to find out what they offer or what it costs. So I will say that when I started doing teaching this approach about 3 years ago, I was noticing that people were hesitant to embrace this question. That's a polite word. They were hesitant. And what I learned was that I had to explain a couple things to make sure they understand why this is so effective and why they should give it a try. And the main thing is, number one, you're asking customers about something in their life, in their world, that happens every day. Because one of the most frequent responses I get is, oh, that's an interesting question because I got a call from a competitor yesterday or last week. So you're tapping into something in their real world that gives you a chance to sort of empathize with. And so it doesn't, and by the way, you haven't even gotten to the point of saying, why would you respond? That's the follow-up question. If they would give a 5 or a 4. The other thing is, so they get calls from customers, from competitors all the time, but it doesn't mean they're cheating on you. What it typically means are 2 things. Number one is, these are examples I'm paraphrasing of answers I've gotten over the years many times. Well, Bob, we're not necessarily shopping around, but my job, I have a fiduciary responsibility to my company to be aware of what's out there. I have to be aware of what else is out there. I have to be aware of what the cost is, what the feature set is, what the value is of what else is out there. Doesn't mean I'm leaving, doesn't mean I'm looking around actively. And it's very likely that if I hear something interesting, I will come back to the incumbent. I'll come back to you and tell you about it. And it might be a feature, it might be a use case or something that maybe you haven't worked on yet that we think might be interesting, and we'd love to present it to you and get your reaction, all based on our having a conversation with a competitor. So I hear that a lot. The other answer I get a lot is, you know what, Bob, we are one company using this product. We have no context as to other best practices, other use cases out there in the industry. And by reaching out or answering a competitor inquiry or going to a competitor's webinar or reading a competitor's white paper, if we may find something that's interesting to us and useful, and again, we might bring that to you. So even if they, I guess the lesson here is, if you can ask this question, and if you can get over your hesitation, because I want to tell you that customers love the question. They love the question. So try and put aside your discomfort of how this isn't how we usually do it, and realize that customers love the questions. So if you can put that aside and you ask the question and they say 5, it's very important to say, thanks for being so candid, because we want to honor and reward them for doing what we want, which is telling the truth. And thanks for being candid. That's really helpful. Why did you say 5? So in other words, don't jump right to, what's the problem? Why, you said 5, there must be a problem. It's almost never an active problem. It's usually what I said before, that they need context. They're looking for, or they want to honor their responsibility of their company of making sure that they are doing the best thing for their job and their company. So the 1 through 5 is very important. You shouldn't just say, how would you react if you got a call from our competitor? That's not enough. You have to give them the 1 to 5, which gives the customer kind of a soft landing. It's an easy answer to just think of a number and give it to you. Then don't assume that 5 is bad or 1 is great. By the same token, ask them why they gave that number, and they will reveal more of their thought process. So before I move on, and because these questions are the centerpiece of this entire approach, and as I said, you could start using them on your next customer call, and I encourage you to do so. I want to break them down and show you why they work and how they're constructed, because it very well, I have a trademark on this approach, but I don't have the patent on all the great questions out there. You can create your own, right? So I want to explain how they work. Number 1, every question that I teach has a hook. It's usually a noun, like board meeting, job description, competitor. It's something your customer relates to. It's something that they don't have to think twice about what it is. They understand it immediately, and that hooks them. Then there's a twist. The twist is, hey, if I was a fly on the wall, or if I could sneak in, or what is your company absolutely counting on you to get done? Or what if you got a call from a competitor? Those are twists that they were not expecting, and it forces them and causes them to engage and lean in and share their perspective. The last piece is, I'll never ask for lists. I never say, what's your board talking about? They might list 3 things, and then I have to go away and guess at what's the most important. I always say, what's the top priority or challenge? What's the one thing your company is counting on you for? So try to remember these, the way the questions are created, the construction of the questions, if you want to, so that you understand how they work, but also if you want to create new questions as well. And these are the centerpiece of this QBR alternative, which is simply, let's not overcomplicate it. It's a 10-minute maybe conversation. It could be 30 minutes where you invite the customer to a conversation that starts, the context is this. This goes back to Nicole's question. Here's the ask. And it's not, you notice it's not short, right? But it's authentic. And it's important to show authenticity all throughout the process. Hey, I hope this note finds you well. I know you're busy, so I'm always sensitive about asking for a bit more of your time. With that said, we're embarking on a concerted effort to raise the bar on how well we understand our customers' bigger picture, not just the day-to-day, but also the business priorities for the company overall, especially today as so many business priorities and challenges are evolving rapidly. Would you be available for a 20 to 30-minute one-on-one conversation? It doesn't have to be one-on-one, but those are the most productive. Again, you could position it as, at the beginning of our next meeting, can we set aside 10 or 20 minutes for this? Okay. And then it reinforces here in yellow, we're basically looking for your candid perspective on a few topics, mostly around your company's high-level priorities and challenges in the marketplace. You could read this as a customer. You could read this as, yeah, they're asking for my time, but it sounds worthwhile, and they're kind of doing research. Like, that's kind of how it sounds. But the most important thing is over on the right. When my clients send this out to set up, if I'm doing a listening tour for a company and that company sends this to their customers, 70% of the customers that get this email book time with me. And I'm a former marketing guy, so I can tell you that that is an unheard of response and conversion rate. And what does that tell you? That the conversion rate is so high. It tells you that customers are interested in being helpful. It tells you that customers have a lot to say. It tells you that customers like being asked their opinion. And again, you're setting the stage for this conversation where there's engagement. They're not going to show up and then it's like you have to pull teeth, right? So, Ola, thanks. I hope you use this email template. Michelle saying, I love to use the about their job rad question. Oh, so Michelle, you're saying you've actually used it. You said, and when they answer, I say, how does that tie into your organization's talk? So Michelle is one of, I have to say, one of my favorite folks I've met in CS who has taken my approach and run with it. And she does let me know from time to time that it's working. And I really appreciate that, Michelle. Thank you for sharing that. So how do we know it's working when, again, when we have this 10 to 20, maybe 30-minute set aside conversation just about the customer? Is they agree to talk in the first place. Your listen to talk ratio will go way up. They'll be talking 70, 80% of the conversation. They start to reveal more and more stuff that's useful. They go past the time limit sometimes. It's just amazing to me that sometimes it will be in the 29th minute of a discovery call. And I'll say, yeah, I'll wrap it up. I want to be respectful of your time. And they say, no, this is important. So we can go a little longer. And I say, what do you mean? Why is this important? You're giving me your time. Bob, we never have a chance to talk about what's important to us in these vendor conversations. I want you to remember that. Bob, we never have a chance to talk like this about what's most important to us with our vendors. So remember that as one of the things that if you're not sure how you should engage with your customer, you're not sure about asking such a disruptive question, customers are hungry to share more information about themselves. And once in a while, they thank me, and I'm always shocked. And I say, no, I'm thanking you. You gave me your time. And they say, no, this is good. We should do this again. We should do it more often. So I always, of course, share that with my clients because that's good for all of us. And I'll just start to wrap it up here by just saying, it's important to think of this as you, by doing this, by asking these questions, by listening better, by being curious, you're modeling the behavior you want your customer to exhibit. We complain that our customers aren't being authentic. They're not telling us everything. They're not telling us the truth. We complain that our customers don't ask us questions about the product. We complain that they're not transparent or candid. Well, we're changing that. We're starting. We have to go first. I want to talk with you, not at you, which shows that we are being authentic. Less slides is my example there. We're being vulnerable. We're saying, I don't know. I want to be the student. I want to learn from you, customer. And I want to learn a little bit about what's important to you. So we're admitting that we don't have all the answers. And I think that is a dynamic in customer success that I hear a lot is we feel like we always have to have the answer. Well, sure, if it's about the product, you're supposed to be the expert, but you can still say, I don't know. But more importantly, when they start sharing about their company strategy and their job priorities, you become the student. And that's a wonderful thing. The customer likes to be the teacher at those moments. You're exhibiting curiosity. You're telling them you want to learn from them. And they come to feel like they can ask you anything. They can say anything and ask you anything. Someone said earlier today, well, on that competitor question that you recommend, what if the customer just doesn't want to hurt your feelings? And my point is that by that point in the conversation, when you ask the competitor question, they already see that you want the truth, because you're being very transparent with them and very authentic with the questions. So they're going to reciprocate by giving you the most candid answer they can. So that's how it works. What I'm going to do is just click on these because they're a little bit, self-serving in some ways. I don't want you to see it that way, but that's kind of, I get emails like this or LinkedIn messages every week or so. You can look at these when you watch the video, but there was one of the questions, what would make you a customer for life? That's actually one of the questions I teach. And the prospect ended up saying something that was a misperception that they had. And by resolving that misperception, the 1-year proposed contract turned into a 3-year deal. This one, same thing, but a 70K expansion on a 120K renewal. And this one, I love, where is it? The competitive question. They asked the question, if a competitor called, how would you react? And the CSM uncovered a massive issue that they didn't know about, which gave the company a chance to save that client. So in other words, it was a latent issue that the customer figured for one reason or another. We're done. I'm not going to even share this concern with them. And by asking an authentic question, they got that answer. So when you think about your next QBR, try to contrast the old way with the new way. I would say focus on make the meeting about their business priorities and challenges. Instead of going into a meeting to try and prove or defend the value you're delivering, help define the value on their terms by asking these questions. The engagement should be flip it from you talking 80% of the time to them hopefully talking 80%. I call these listening techniques the STFU or $TFU, which stands for silence till you fully understand. And I explain that more on my website and then training. And then the outcome, instead of just getting confirmation that they're happy and they're not leaving, feedback of the product, we want to connect those dots, position your solution. How do we position our solution to align with what's most important to them? I want to leave it open. I don't see any open questions, but there have been some great comments in the chat and some great questions before. So Dave, I want to throw it back to you also to see what you think and what questions you might have.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bob. A lot here. Is there a version of this PowerPoint you're willing to share as part of this as well?
Sure.
Great. So absolutely. For the audience, we will include that. Again, an audience, trickle in some questions here as we wrap up. Was there a book recommendation on deep listening you mentioned?
Can you repeat that? Was it? I was reading the.
Was there a book recommendation on deep listening?
Deep Listening by Oscar Trimboli, Trimboli. The podcast. It's unbelievable to me how much someone can geek out on the body of work and evidence and science around listening. I'll just say that. So and I will say further that a lot of what he says, although it's discussed in a professional setting, how to use listening at work, you'll come away with, as with many of the resources I talk about, you'll come away with tips for how to listen in real life to each other, to friends, to people on the other side of the political spectrum, family, loved ones, etc. It's a wonderful thing.
And yes, so a couple areas we can learn more that the audience is learning about. We will publish this on our website, recording a version of these slides. Bob, here's your contact information here if you need to contact Bob directly and learn more from his resources or his website as well. And then just had one last question.
Yeah.
About, let's see, could you share a success story where implementing RAD principles resulted in a positive impact on customer sat, loyalty, and business outcomes? Any real quick anecdotes there on implementing RAD?
Well, let's see. I guess I went through them so quickly that they didn't leave a mark. There are, I would say hundreds of examples like that. Both at the individual customer level of increased satisfaction, at the brand level, in other words, a customer success team bringing back insights that helped drive growth through driving innovation, things like that. So these are all examples, and I've stopped updating this. I probably should. That there are many more. And so feel free to look at my website. There are a ton of videos from people I've worked with that talk about their success stories. I didn't want to bore you guys with that in the session today. But if you look on the website under, I think it's client stories or something like that, you'll see a bunch of examples. And that's a great question. So I appreciate you asking.
Great. Awesome. Well, we appreciate great participation from the audience. Look forward to continuing the dialogue. Obviously, reach out to Bob on LinkedIn as he continues to post and share his experiences and thoughts. We will post this, and thank you for those who have tuned in today, and look forward to engaging more here with the community. And again, thanks to Bob. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next events.
Dave, thanks for the opportunity, and keep up the great work over there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Cheers.
All right.